The void is not empty. For millennia we looked to the heavens and saw perfection, a clockwork of celestial bodies painted on a canvas of black velvet. It was a realm of gods of constance, of serene and untouchable beauty. We were wrong. We have filled the silence with our voices, our signals, our ambition, and we have littered the pristine darkness with our refuse. Up there in the silent, sun-drenched emptiness just beyond our sky, a storm is raging. It is a tempest of our own making, invisible to the naked eye. A hurricane of metal shards, of spent rocket stages and dead satellites. Each fragment a bullet traveling 10 times faster than one fired from a rifle. This is the legacy of our ascent, a ghost haunting the cradle of our cosmic future. And on a day that began like any other, this ghost reached out from the darkness, and it found the thin, fragile shell of a dream. It was meant to be a mission of triumph, another confident step in a nation's audacious journey to the stars. China's Shenzhou-20, the divine vessel, was a testament to meticulous engineering, a symbol of a new power asserting its place in the cosmos. On board 3 taikonauts, Commander Li Wei, Dr. Chen Yue, and pilot Zhang Hao. They were the very embodiment of a nation's aspirations, their names etched into the annals of human exploration before their journey even began. Their vessel was a marvel, the culmination of decades of research, a gleaming white chariot destined for the Tiangong space station, the heavenly palace that orbits our world as a permanent outpost of humanity. The launch from the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center had been flawless. A pillar of fire and smoke had torn through the Gobi Desert sky, propelling the capsule and its precious human cargo toward the heavens. Across the planet, millions watched, witnessing not just a technological feat, but a profound statement of intent. The 21st century space race was not merely a contest between old rivals. It was a multipolar endeavor, a new stage for human drama and achievement. For Commander Li, a veteran of 2 previous missions, this was a routine ascent. For Dr. Chen, a brilliant astrophysicist, it was the chance to conduct experiments that could rewrite our understanding of stellar formation. And for Zhang Hao, the young, daring pilot, it was his first taste of the void, the fulfillment of a lifelong dream nurtured since he was a child, watching grainy footage of the first celestial explorers. Their mission profile was clear, a 6-hour journey to rendezvous and dock with the orbiting laboratory. Once there, they would begin a 6-month tour of duty, expanding the station, conducting scientific research, and pushing the boundaries of long-duration human habitation beyond Earth's protective atmosphere. Inside the cramped but orderly confines of the Shenzhou capsule, the mood was one of focused professionalism, tinged with the quiet awe that only comes from seeing the gentle curve of the Earth unfurl beneath you. The blue marble, a swirl of white clouds and deep azure oceans hung in the blackness like a divine jewel. From this vantage point, the borders and conflicts that defined life below simply melted away, replaced by the profound unifying reality of a shared home. They were travelers, ambassadors for 7 billion souls, sailing on an ocean of infinite night. But that ocean is no longer pristine. To understand the catastrophe that awaited Shenzhou-20, we must first understand the invisible junkyard through which it was flying. Imagine a perfectly clear crystalline lake. For decades, every boat that crossed it has shed a single microscopic fleck of paint. Individually, they are harmless, invisible. But over time, millions upon millions of these flecks now contaminate the water. Now imagine that each tiny fleck is not drifting but moving at 28,000 kilometers per hour. The crystal clear lake is now a death trap, a minefield of hypervelocity projectiles. This is the state of low Earth orbit. our journey to the stars began with a single beep. In 1957, the Soviet Union's Sputnik, a polished sphere no larger than a beach ball, ascended into the heavens, its simple radio pulse announcing the dawn of the space age. It was a moment of unbridled wonder, but when its mission ended, it did not vanish. It burned up in the atmosphere, but its carrier rocket, the R-7 Semyorka, remained in orbit for 2 months, a silent, tumbling hulk of metal. This was the first piece of what we now call space junk. It was the genesis of a problem no one at the time could have possibly foreseen. The early days of the space race were a frantic scramble for supremacy, a high-stakes geopolitical contest played out on the ultimate frontier. Satellites were launched with breathtaking speed by the United States and the Soviet Union. Some were for science, some for communication, some for espionage. Little thought was given to what would happen to them once their batteries died or their fuel was spent. Space seemed infinitely vast, an endless dumping ground that could absorb our celestial refuse without consequence. Then, in 1978, a NASA scientist named Donald Kessler published a paper that would prove to be terrifyingly prescient. He was not an alarmist, but a meticulous astrophysicist studying the orbital environment. His calculations pointed to a chilling conclusion. Kessler theorized that once the density of objects in a particular orbit reached a critical point, a chain reaction would become inevitable. A single collision would generate a cloud of new debris. Each piece of that new debris would then increase the probability of further collisions, which would in turn create even more debris. It was a feedback loop, a runaway cascade of destruction that could, in theory, render certain orbits entirely unusable for generations, perhaps centuries. This terrifying concept became known as the Kessler Syndrome. At the time, it was a distant, almost academic concern. The sky was still big, the problem seemed manageable, but we continued to fill the void. Discarded rocket stages, some the size of school buses, were left to tumble aimlessly. Satellites that had served their purpose were simply switched off, becoming silent metallic ghosts. Astronauts on spacewalks accidentally lost tools, a wrench, a spatula, a camera, each one transformed into a lethal projectile. And then came the weapons. During the Cold War, both superpowers developed and tested anti-satellite or ASAT weapons. In 1985, the United States launched a missile from an F-15 fighter jet, destroying a defunct American satellite and creating thousands of new pieces of debris. It was a statement of military capability that echoed loudly in the heavens. For years, a fragile, unwritten truce held. That truce was shattered in 2007. In a move that stunned the international community, China tested its own anti-satellite missile, obliterating one of its old Fengyun weather satellites. The event was a catastrophic success. The satellite, weighing nearly a ton, was annihilated. In its place, a cloud of over 3,000 trackable pieces of debris was born, along with hundreds of thousands of smaller, untraceable fragments. Overnight, this single event increased the total amount of space junk in orbit by a third. It was an act of celestial vandalism, a poisoning of the well that endangered every satellite, every astronaut, every future mission from every nation. 2 years later, the first major collision predicted by Kessler occurred. A defunct Russian military satellite, Cosmos 2251, slammed into an active American communications satellite, Iridium 33. The two objects, with a combined mass of over 1.5 tons, collided at a relative velocity of over 42,000 kilometers per hour. The resulting explosion of debris was immense, spawning yet another cloud of lethal shrapnel that spread across the most heavily trafficked orbital highways. Today, the situation is dire. Space surveillance networks across the globe track roughly 30,000 objects larger than a softball. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. It is estimated there are more than 1 million objects between 1 and 10 centimeters in size, each one capable of inflicting catastrophic damage on a spacecraft. And the number of fragments smaller than a centimeter, well over 100 million. Think about the physics. Kinetic energy is 1/2 mass times velocity squared. In orbit, velocity is the dominant factor. A tiny fleck of paint weighing less than a gram strikes with the energy of a bowling ball dropped from a 3-story building. A 1 centimeter aluminum sphere carries the destructive force of a hand grenade. This is the environment through which Shenzhou-20 was soaring, an invisible minefield where the laws of probability were slowly but surely turning against humanity. 4 hours into their mission, floating in the serene calm of their capsule, the crew of Shenzhou-20 were finalizing their approach vector to the Tiangong station. On the ground, at the Beijing Aerospace Command and Control Center, technicians monitored thousands of data streams. Their systems were a symphony of precision, tracking the Shenzhou's position down to the meter, its velocity to the centimeter per second. They were also tracking something else. It was designated Object 37728. A piece of debris from the 2007 Chinese ASAT test, a ghost from their own nation's past, returning to haunt its ambitious future. The fragment was small, no more than 10 centimeters, across a jagged piece of a solar panel from the destroyed Fengyun satellite. For years it had been tumbling through the void, its orbit slowly decaying, its path mapped and remapped by powerful ground-based radars. The orbital prediction models showed a potential conjunction. The path of Shenzhou-20 and the path of Object 37728 were projected to cross. This was not an unusual occurrence. The International Space Station performs avoidance maneuvers several times a year. Satellites are constantly being shifted to dodge incoming threats. It is a cosmic ballet of avoidance, but this time the numbers were tricky. The probability of collision was low, extremely low, 1 in tens of thousands. Performing a burn to alter the Shenzhou's course would consume precious fuel, and it would delay their carefully timed rendezvous with the station. The flight controllers in Beijing ran the simulations again and again. The models were consistent. The fragment would pass by with a margin of several kilometers. A decision was made. No maneuver was necessary. It was a judgment call based on data, on precedent, on the cold logic of probability. It was a decision that would be replayed and dissected in agonizing detail for years to come, because probability in the unforgiving environment of space is a cruel and indifferent master. Aboard Shenzhou-20, there was no warning. There was no screech of metal, no roar of an explosion. In the vacuum of space, sound does not travel. The impact was felt more than it was heard. A violent, percussive jolt, as if the hand of a giant had slapped the vessel from its course. The capsule shuddered violently, throwing the 3 taikonauts against their restraints. Red lights flashed across the control panels, and a cacophony of alarms shrieked through the cabin, a piercing wail that shattered the tranquil atmosphere. Commander Li Wei reacted on pure instinct, his years of training taking over. His hands flew across the controls, trying to silence the alarms, to understand the cascade of system failures scrolling across his screen. Status report. He commanded, his voice strained but steady. Pilot Zhang Hao, his face pale, fought with the control stick. We are in an uncontrolled spin. Thrusters are not responding. From the other side of the cabin, Dr. Chen Yue's voice was laced with dread. Cabin pressure is dropping. We have a hull breach. The hiss was faint, almost imperceptible beneath the blare of the alarms, but it was the deadliest sound a human can hear in space. It was the sound of their breathable atmosphere, their very life being sucked out into the infinite vacuum. The taikonauts moved with practiced speed, their emergency drills now a terrifying reality. They sealed their helmets, activating their suits' internal oxygen supplies. Through his visor, Commander Lee could see a constellation of tiny glittering particles dancing in a sunbeam that lanced through the cabin window. Ice crystals. The moisture from their own breath freezing instantly as it escaped through a wound in their ship's metallic skin. On the ground, chaos had erupted. The stream of telemetry from Shenzhou-20 had suddenly turned to gibberish. One moment they were watching a perfectly healthy spacecraft. The next they were seeing catastrophic failure warnings across every system. Propulsion, life support, communications, power. All of it blinking red. Then the signal died completely. For 12 agonizing minutes there was only silence. The controllers in Beijing could do nothing but stare at their screens, their minds racing through the worst-case scenarios. Had the vessel been destroyed? Were the crew already gone? The silence was a form of torture, a black hole of uncertainty. Then a faint, garbled signal crackled back to life. It was Zhang Hao's voice, weak and distorted, but there. Beijing Control, this is Shenzhou-20. We have been struck. I repeat, we are struck. A collective sigh of relief, immediately replaced by profound dread, swept through the control center. They were alive, but they were in terrible, terrible trouble. Over the next few hours, as the crippled Shenzhou tumbled through its orbit, the crew managed to piece together the extent of their predicament. The impact had occurred on the aft service module. This section of the spacecraft housed the main engine, the fuel tanks, the solar panels, and critical life support equipment. It was the heart and lungs of their vessel, and it had been savaged. Using a small inspection camera on a robotic arm, they were able to get a visual. The image that appeared on their screen was horrifying. A gaping, jagged hole had been punched through the module's outer wall. Cables and pipes were severed, spilling frozen fluids into space. The main engine bell was mangled, twisted into an unrecognizable shape. Their solar arrays were shattered, depriving them of their primary source of power. They were alive, but they were stranded. They were trapped in a tin can, running on limited battery power, with no way to slow down, no way to change their orbit, no way to come home. The divine vessel had become a coffin adrift in the cosmos. The news was a seismic shock to the world. After an initial period of tightly controlled silence, the Chinese government was forced to acknowledge the disaster. The announcement was stark and somber. Shenzhou-20 had suffered a hypervelocity impact from an untracked orbital object. The crew was alive and stable, but their situation was extremely grave. Immediately, the global space community mobilized. This was no longer a Chinese problem. It was a human crisis. At NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, at Roscosmos Mission Control near Moscow, and at the European Space Agency's Operations Center in Germany, teams of engineers and flight dynamics experts began working around the clock. Old rivalries and political tensions evaporated, replaced by a singular unifying goal: bring the taikonauts home. The challenges were immense, a logistical and engineering nightmare of astronomical proportions. Shenzhou-20 was in a specific orbital inclination and altitude, a path carefully chosen for its rendezvous with the Tiangong station. No other crewed spacecraft was ready for an immediate launch. A new rescue mission would have to be prepared from scratch, a process that normally takes months, not days. The taikonauts' clock was ticking. Their battery power was their most critical consumable. To conserve it, they powered down every non-essential system. The cabin grew cold and dark, their only light coming from the Earth and the impossibly bright stars outside their viewport. Their oxygen was being scrubbed by lithium hydroxide canisters, but their supply was finite. Initial estimates gave them less than 2 weeks. The world watched, holding its breath. The faces of Li Wei, Chen Yue, and Zhang Hao were on every screen. Their families, sequestered by the state, became silent symbols of the unfolding drama. We learned about Commander Lee's 2 young daughters, who he promised he would take to see the ocean when he returned. We heard about Dr. Chen's groundbreaking research, her quest to understand the universe that now held her captive. We saw photographs of the young pilot Zhang Hao on the day he was selected for the Taikonaut Corps, his face beaming with a pride and joy that was now heartbreaking to witness. They were not just astronauts, they were people with hopes, fears, and families, and they were trapped in the most remote and hostile environment imaginable. Their plight tapped into a primal human fear of being lost, of being helpless, of facing the infinite alone. The first option considered was another Chinese mission. Could a second Shenzhou-21 be prepared and launched in time? Engineers at Jiuquan worked with a frantic intensity, attempting to condense a 3-month launch preparation schedule into a matter of days. It was a monumental task, fraught with risk. A rushed launch could easily lead to a second disaster. Meanwhile, NASA and SpaceX began exploring an even more audacious plan. A Crew Dragon capsule, the workhorse of America's human spaceflight program, was being prepared for a routine crew rotation to the International Space Station. Could its mission be changed? Could it be launched to a different orbit to rendezvous, not with the ISS, but with the crippled Shenzhou? The orbital mechanics were a nightmare. Launching from Cape Canaveral in Florida to intercept a spacecraft launched from the Gobi Desert required immense amounts of fuel and perfect timing. Furthermore, the 2 vehicles were not designed to connect. The Dragon used a NASA docking system. The Shenzhou used a Russian-derived design. A direct docking was impossible. The rescue would require a perilous, unprecedented series of spacewalks. As the days crawled by, the psychological strain on the stranded crew was immense. They maintained a disciplined routine of system checks, physical exercise, and communication with the ground. Their voices, a beacon of calm in an ocean of uncertainty. But in the quiet moments, the reality of their situation was inescapable. They would watch the Earth pass beneath them, a silent, swirling testament to everything they had ever known and loved. They could see the lights of cities at night, the outlines of continents by day. So close, so impossibly, heartbreakingly far. They were marooned on a desolate shore with the entire world just a few hundred kilometers away. Commander Lee, the stoic veteran, focused on maintaining morale, sharing stories of his previous flights, reassuring his younger crewmates. Dr. Chen immersed herself in the data, analyzing their vessel's decay, calculating their odds, finding a strange comfort in the cold, hard numbers. Zhang Hao, the rookie, found his solace at the window, mesmerized by the brutal beauty of the cosmos that had betrayed him. Finally, after 9 days of non-stop work and frantic international collaboration, a plan was solidified. It was a hybrid plan, a gamble of epic proportions. China would launch an uncrewed Shenzhou-21 stripped of all non-essential equipment and packed with extra fuel and supplies. Its goal was not to retrieve the crew, but to stabilize their failing craft. It would attempt a high-risk automated docking to transfer power and oxygen, buying the taikonauts more time. Simultaneously, SpaceX would launch the Crew Dragon designated Rescue 1 on a high-energy trajectory to intercept them. It was a 2-pronged attack, a global effort to pluck 3 souls from the void. The world watched as the Long March rocket carrying Shenzhou-21 blasted off from Jiuquan. The 48-hour journey to the crippled vessel was the most tense rendezvous operation in history. The automated docking system had to latch onto a tumbling, powerless target. It was like trying to thread a needle in a hurricane. Miraculously, after several heart-stopping attempts, the clamps engaged. The connection was made. Power and life-sustaining oxygen began to flow into Shenzhou-20, resetting the taikonauts' dwindling clock. 3 days later, the Falcon 9 rocket carrying the Dragon capsule lit up the Florida night sky. On board were 2 American astronauts and 1 Russian cosmonaut, a crew forged in crisis, their mission singular and sacred. Their journey was even more complex, a celestial chase across the globe. For 2 days they performed a series of intricate engine burns, slowly, carefully closing the distance to the 2 docked Shenzhou capsules. Finally, they achieved what the mission planners had dreamed of. From the windows of their Dragon they could see it, the gleaming white of the rescue Shenzhou docked to the dark, maimed hull of its sister ship tumbling together against the backdrop of the stars. "We have visual contact," the Dragon commander reported, his voice resonating with the weight of the historic moment. What followed was the most dangerous spacewalk ever attempted. The Russian cosmonaut and one of the American astronauts exited their Dragon, their movements slow and deliberate in the zero-gravity environment. Tethered to their own ship, they had to cross the 50-meter gap of open space to the Shenzhou's airlock. Their target was unstable, still exhibiting a slow, gentle spin from the impact. Any mistake, any miscalculation could send them hurtling into the void. Guided by the astronauts inside the Dragon and the frantic voices from mission controls around the world, they made the treacherous crossing. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the Shenzhou's outer hatch. They worked to open it, their bulky gloves, making the delicate task a struggle. Inside, Li Chen and Zhang were waiting, having depressurized their own cabin in preparation for the transfer. One by one, the taikonauts emerged from the ship that had been their home and their prison. They clipped their tethers to the rescue line that stretched between the 2 vessels. For a moment, each of them floated in the vast emptiness, a tiny human figure suspended between a broken dream and a fragile hope, with the silent, beautiful Earth as their witness. They made the crossing, their movements guided by their rescuers. The sight was breathtaking. An American, a Russian, and 3 Chinese explorers working together in the most hostile environment known to humanity, their national flags on their suits, irrelevant, their shared humanity, the only thing that mattered. Once all 3 taikonauts were safely inside, the Dragon, the world erupted. In Beijing, in Houston, in Moscow, cheers and tears flowed in equal measure. The impossible had been achieved. The return to Earth was a triumph. The Dragon capsule blazed through the atmosphere, a man-made meteor delivering its precious cargo home. The taikonauts of Shenzhou-20, weakened but alive, had returned from the brink. Their story was one of harrowing survival and unprecedented international cooperation. But it was also a warning, a shot across the bow for all of humankind. The Shenzhou-20 disaster was the Kessler Syndrome made real. It was the moment when the theoretical danger of space junk became a terrifying, life-threatening reality. The incident forced a global reckoning. We had treated the heavens as an infinite resource, a boundless frontier immune to our carelessness. We were forced to see it for what it is, a fragile, finite ecosystem, an orbital environment that requires stewardship and protection just like the oceans and forests on the planet below. In the years that followed, a new space race began. Not a race for national pride or military dominance, but a race for survival, a race to clean up our orbital backyard. International consortiums were formed, pooling resources and technology. Ambitious new missions were designed not to explore new worlds, but to save our access to them. Visionary concepts that had once seemed like science fiction were now being seriously developed. Giant nets to capture clusters of debris, robotic tugboats with harpoons to spear and deorbit dead satellites, powerful ground-based lasers designed to gently nudge objects onto a trajectory that would see them burn up harmlessly in the atmosphere. The cleanup will be the most difficult and expensive environmental project in human history. It will take generations. The story of Shenzhou-20 is a story of our time. It is a tale of incredible technological ambition paired with a dangerous lack of foresight. It is a testament to the fragility of our creations and the resilience of the human spirit. The three taikonauts who looked death in the face and survived became global ambassadors, their voices powerful advocates for a new era of cosmic responsibility. They remind us that the sky is not a ceiling but an ocean that connects us all, that holds our future, that carries our communications, and that allows us to look back upon our own world with wonder and perspective. We have sailed on this ocean and we have polluted its waters. Now we must work together to clean it. For if we fail, the final frontier will be closed to us. The door to the stars, which we have worked so hard to open, will be slammed shut by a storm of our own making, and we will be stranded here on our beautiful, fragile island, forever looking up at a sky we can no longer reach.